Welcome to Finding Hope, the End to Suffering. Hosted by psychologist, author, and co-founder of the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership, Dr. Barry Weinhold, with national radio host, award-winning producer, and inspirational speaker, Patricia Raskin.
Hi, Barry.
Hi, Patricia. How's your week gone?
Good. Great to be here for Finding Hope, the End to Suffering, which you created beautifully and masterfully so, having been in this field for many, many years and written about 60 books and interviewed and talked to thousands of people and helped so many people all over the world. I think it's wonderful you're bringing this to the forefront in the media.
Well, the message comes not from me, but from our guests who are able to share their story and their narrative about what happened to them that caused suffering, and then what did they do about it. And just every guest has a different story to tell. And so it's always unique. And Rafa did a great job. If any of you missed last week, he talked a lot about how he came to a realization when he was 14 that his father was not really supporting him, and it took a while for him to sink in. In fact, he found out eventually that every boss that he had, he was in competition with, the way he was in competition with his father, and that his bosses were like father figures, and he got himself fired several times. And finally, my wife Janae saw him at his partner's acupuncture office, and said to Rafa, Rafa said, "I just got fired." And Janae threw her arms around him and said, "Congratulations, you finally have reached a point where you don't need that anymore." And it sort of got him thinking about, wow, I've been carrying around this burden and this suffering about having to be in competition with all these people and show them how important I am to them. And he gave that up and began to then see that his life would change a lot if he gave up his pride, which was part of what was keeping him going with that. And then shared a nice story about how he was finally forced to surrender his pride and become much more humble. And you'll see in this segment how that humbleness just oozes out of him. He's just one of those guys that is like a teddy bear. So, Rafa, let's talk some more about your journey and my teddy bear.
Good to see you guys.
Yeah. And you were talking a little bit about, at the end of our last segment, about how pride got in your way. I don't know if you want to pick it up there or wherever you want to pick it up.
Well, thank you, Barry. Yes, I'd like to try and continue with, I'll recap what I was talking about when I was I worked for my dad on a ranch that we had acquired, 4,400 acres in the fall of 1991 or 1990, all the way up until 2011 when the ranch was sold. Everything leading up to that, I essentially had run the ranch myself. And after that, I had to take on jobs. And when I was living there in Texas, in the job market that I was in, there came the downturn in the oil field, which is where I was working, and jobs were scarce and everything. And a missionary couple had taken me in. And the humbling part of that experience was that I had to accept being taken care of, or I had to accept grace from somebody else. Mm-hmm. And a very prideful person wouldn't do that. Well, at that point, there weren't any options. And it was a humbling experience and a very prayerful experience. Having to surrender my pride enough to accept their gifts, not with anger, but with the grace that those gifts were intended. And that started my journey, leading me to where I am today. And so it was very important to cast the experience of breaking my pride. During that time, another thing that had also happened was a group of really powerful prayer guys, men, of a group called the Chariots of Fire. It's a kind of a bikers club for Christian men. And they had some really good prayer, and they laid their hands on me and they prayed for me and with me. And that again was a way to open up my very closed off heart, and helped me to surrender away from my pride and into an actual relationship. Maybe I didn't have that kind of a relationship with my earthly father, but I definitely was able to have a relationship with my heavenly Father in a way that I actually was able to start loving myself. So one of the hardest commandments of the 10 Commandments is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Well, if I was to love my neighbors as I love myself, there'd be a whole bunch of dead bodies everywhere. I mean, it would not be a pretty sight. Nobody would want to be my neighbor. It would be kind of bad, because that's how I treated myself. I would beat myself up for the smallest transgressions, yet, any stranger doing something that was a mistake or wrong, and you would forgive them and help them along their way. You would never let that stick to you.
Right.
But when it's yourself, it sticks to you like tar, and it's black like tar. And so growing up Catholic and the whole mea culpa culture, this type of forgiveness and this commandment meant a whole lot to me. So when I had to try and love my neighbors as I love myself, that was a tall order. Being able to break that pride helped me move way through that and on my way to finding hope. And the finding of this hope is to be able to understand my life's journey to this point. And you all had discussed, if you can name it, you can tame it. And Patricia, you had mentioned that a lot of people just like to, name it, and because they're like addicted to trying to name things and what have you, trying to heal themselves. For me, if I were to know the names of everything that I was going through so I could name it and tame it, it would mean nothing to me if my pride was still intact, if my pride was in my way. Because pride is what blocks you from yourself and from that kind of healing that needs to take place in order for you to move forward.
But I have a question, Rafa. It's kind of like when you say, well, you hit the hot stove and then it's going to burn you, so you move away. In a way, does pride protect you? Because what if you are vulnerable, as you were, but you didn't have those loving people around you? You had people, when you became vulnerable, that kicked you in the face. So I guess my question is pride always a bad thing if you're in an unsafe situation? You were in a very safe situation where you could be vulnerable with people who really loved you and were there for you unconditionally.
Well, I think I would draw a distinction between confidence and pride, because you can be confident, but you can be prideful in the sense of hubris, which is beyond confidence.
Right. It's like narcissism, sort of. Yeah.
I'll let Barry handle that part of it. But one of the things that I was able, one of the other life pivot points was understanding and having the aha moment of life happens for you. Life doesn't happen to you.
Yeah.
And it made very clear sense to me, but only because of where I was at the time, because of where I was in this journey.
Right.
You know, you can say that to 100 different people, and 100 different people are going to take it 100 different ways.
Right.
But for me, in that part of my journey, the other part of that is I do not have to know what the plans are. I just have to know that life is happening for me, not to me. I don't have to be, the whole story doesn't have to be disclosed to me, but it's
great.
happening for me.
Yeah.
So that was that part of that realization. And
Barry, do you want to comment on that? Because you talk a lot about that, Barry, that life is for you.
Yeah, it's a big shift in people's consciousness when it's like from being a victim to becoming a victor.
Right.
In life, and people walk around, woe is me, and this happened to me, and that happened to me, and ain't it awful, and that's how they spend their time, and it doesn't really get them anywhere, except they hope it gets them some sympathy or some connection to other people, that maybe other people will then feel sorry for them and take care of them more, but they don't allow that very much anyway. They want to maintain that victim role, and they get stuck in it. And then, as Rafa said, the difference between, things happen to me or I am making things happen in my life because life is for me is a huge difference.
Oh, good, thanks. So go ahead, Rafa.
yeah, and another part of this is, when you worry about being able to find hope, okay, when you worry, that is having faith in fear.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving yourself over to fear when you worry. I would rather have faith in fear than I would in a higher power, than I would within myself. And instead of when we have this fear, what we are doing is we're making an interest payment on things that have never happened or things that never happen. And that takes its toll on your body. The body keeps the score. Or like Carolyn May says, when run out of that money, of your body ends up having to replace that energy, that money that you're expending on this worry and fear, and it affects your health. So it's not so much about what you're eating, but what is eating you that matters.
Yeah.
And, I find that having been able to work with Barry, being in this place, my journey to finding hope is I was able to be brave, like Dr. Brene Brown says. I was able to be brave and vulnerable to myself and understand myself so that I could hear wisdom coming from Barry or coming from music in a song. When I was a young man, a child, I loved to sing, and I loved, I still sing, but I love the philosophy in the music that we listen to. And one of the things that was very, very important for me growing up was the lines from the Eagles song. Oftentimes it happens that we live our lives in chains, but we never even know we have the key.
Yeah. Well, you're an Eagles fan. In fact, I know that your favorite song is one of the Eagles hits.
Well, though you asked me to sing a song that described me, and
yeah, talk a little bit about that at the end here. I think that'd be interesting to people.
Well, one of the songs that I identify with the Eagles, among a bunch of other of their songs, was "Desperado," because of my cowboy life, and essentially, I lived in a 5,600 acre bedroom where I just locked myself in my bedroom, and I didn't have to deal with the outside world, you know.
Yeah.
And then that grew to an even larger a larger ranch, which led even to a 61,000 acre ranch that I took care of. I mean, just my bedrooms kept on getting bigger, but I didn't reach my healing potential until I ended up in a nice small little place community here in Colorado Springs, where I was able to work with Barry and Janae on a regular basis, understanding relationship, understanding contracts between myself and the other people in my life that I relate to, not taking it personally, which is super hard to do because I'm the only other person in the room when it happens. When you get fired, you know, it's all about this kind of growth. But I couldn't do any of this healing. I couldn't find hope and overcome any of this without first loving myself in a humble way, a respectful way, having oceans of mercy for myself and having grace for myself. And completely opposite of narcissism, this is being able to be at peace with yourself.
So beautifully.
Wow, thank you so much for telling your story. It was just, I mean, I was sitting here almost in tears a couple of times just listening to your story. Although I've heard parts of it before, but just the way you tell it.
Yes.
It's
the way you tell it. You should really write a book on this, Rafi.
Yeah.
The way you tell it is beautifully and heartfelt, and we're able to catch it. Thank you.
And in my book, Get Real, of course, I talk about how to become authentic. And Rafa is an example of somebody who is really authentic. And it shows when people are authentic, like Rafa.
Yeah.
So, and I we'll have to wrap up this session, but I want all the people in the audience to know that we've got something even better next time, if that's possible. You're a tough act to follow, but Eric Watson will be on next time. And Eric is a young man. He's 26 or 27. And he has totally transformed his life from being an addict to being now an addictions counselor. And he has an incredible story to tell about how he healed himself from all the suffering he had in adolescence or late adolescence, and how he was able to really turn that all around with the help of some other people. I was one of them. He was in our men's group as well at one point, and he said the men's group saved his life because he was just free from addiction for about a year or two when I first met him. And so he's going to tell his story next month when we.
Oh, that's wonderful. And Rafa, thank you for your.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
And thank you for having me. And Eric is a remarkable young man. He always he's got a great story, and he's going to give you a complete different perspective on how we can all find our hope.
And like you, he has a great singing voice.
He's got a really good singing voice.
Okay, well, that's it for today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to us, and be sure to come next week, and we'll start our next series on finding hope, the end to suffering. And welcome.
Thank you, Barry. It was wonderful.
Be well, everybody. Thank you, Patricia, for all your help, and thank you, Rafa, for your great story.
And we can always find hope, guys.
Yes, yes.
Always.
This episode was brought to you by the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership. Find out more about these resources at weinholds.org. Dr. Weinhold is the author or co-author of 75 books on psychology, including his latest book, Get Real: The Hazards of Living Out of Your False Self, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and more. Patricia Raskin is the host of the nationally recognized program, The Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show, and is currently heard on voiceamerica.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. New episodes of Finding Hope, The End to Suffering can be found every Wednesday. If you like the show, please leave a review and give us a rating.